Good afternoon and welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. Today we are continuing in our Oolong Compare and Contrast series, A Tale of Two Seasons. We're still in Anxi in China for this particular compare and contrast, as we're going to be looking at the spring 2025 and the autumn 2025 Anxi hairy crab. Hairy crab being the translation of the name of the cultivar, Mao Xie. I'm not entirely sure where the crab aspect of that comes from, but it's called hairy because literally the tea leaves have got slight hairs going on them, and they can detach and float to the top of the surface of the tea whilst brewing it. So I very much enjoyed the last foray into compare and contrast. So here we are once again with A Tale of Two Seasons. We're now going to move to look at the tea inside these respective packages and then move on to brewing and reviewing the tea. See you in a mo. So here we are for a very, very brief part two of our compare and contrast review of spring 25 and autumn 25 Mao Xie hairy crab oolong. Over here on my left, it's probably going to be left for you, but I never know how these things get inverted by cameras. We have a relative close-up of the spring balls of tea. I like to call them beads. And over here, obviously, therefore, by process elimination, is the autumn harvest. There isn't a great deal of difference between them. It seems to me there's slightly more light green material over here than I can find on this side whatsoever. But in terms of the uniformity of size, well, there really isn't any. They're both relatively non-uniform in the size of some of these beads. So you have some fairly compact ones, and then you have some absolute monsters that are very nearly as big as half my fingernail. But in terms of colour, I would say the spring is slightly paler overall, and with some very much more particular pale bits. And over here, it's very few pale bits and I would say more generally dark, but that might, I would say that's the case. So for once, there's a slight visible difference, but in terms of production and processing, they look pretty much the same. So let's move on to our tasting and reviewing. See you in a mo. Hello and welcome to the first part of part 3. I'm starting to think we should call this part 3A. We've introduced the two teas for today. We've taken a look at the dry leaves, and now we're going to move on to comparing and contrasting. As it did with the Banshan Spring 25 and Autumn 25, we're going to be looking at these independently. That way I can make sure I've got the parameters as close to identical for the two teas. So what we have is our strainer, broad brimmed, our transparent jug for viewing and pouring, one of my smaller capacity drinking cups, the lid from my other gaiwan as a serving platter, and a small capacity gaiwan. I find this one has slightly thicker walls than this gaiwan, or the gaiwan that this is the lid for, so it tends to brew more quickly. So what I'm going to do is follow the parameters as I found them online, which is going to be a standard ratio for Gongfu anyway. It's going to be 3 grams of tea for 50 mils of water at 95. And we're going to start with somewhere between 15 to 20. We're going to try and be careful taking the lid off after about 15. Don't push it further than 20 because I want the steepings to be pretty much identical as possible. Incidentally, this is another tea that I have tried. As with the Banshan, I've tried the spring and I've tried the Mao Xie spring as well. I just haven't tried the autumn one. Next time, we're going to be moving on, God willing, we're going to be moving on to one where I haven't tried either the spring or the autumn version. So this is all good practice. So there's our leaves going in there. As I say, we'll give this 20 to start with. Incidentally, the dry leaves had an incredibly intense grassy note, almost a kind of herbal mint quality to it. So we'll call that quits for our first one, 20 seconds. Those leaves are unfurling pretty rapidly. I think that is as much to do with this particular Gaiwan and a very intense floral, I would say almost lily. I'm sure I'm supposed to be thinking orchid, but to my mind it's more like lilies. And believe me, in my line of work, I smell more lilies than the average man does. So I would say something like a lily. Something very similar coming off the cup already, that off the jug, I beg your pardon. The colour is very pale yellow. That's about identical, I would say. But for a 20-second steep, that's incredibly potent. Let's give that a try. It's really sweetness coming off the cup. Floral, definitely kind of orchid, perfumey. Slightly vegetal. That's really, really nice. And the good thing about making small quantities, I can actually finish the steeping without giving myself the jitters. So let's give that 125. This coming 125, should I say. I don't know how well you can hear it, maybe not at all. If you hear a sort of dull rumbling sound, it's the cat. This is the dining table, and although it's not tremendously hygienic, his basket is just off. It's just off camera. He's not in danger of being burnt by the kettle, and he's just settled himself down. So if you hear a sort of dull rumbling, he's only just finished kneading biscuits, or what do you call it when cats do that? So we're going for 25 with this. Try not to spill it everywhere. That's what I get even using a wide-brimmed strainer. The floral is even more potent. The vegetal note is coming through quite strongly. The orchid, incredibly perfumey orchid, is still there. Right, same colour, slightly more intense yellow, with more of a vegetal note, although it may just be that the perfumey quality has a vegetal note. It may not be that it's cooking. What I'm trying to get is I don't think it's the smell of something that's overcooked. Oh yeah. Wow. The orchid's coming very strongly off the cup there. Oh, wow. Yeah. Flavour's not dropping off either. That's orchid. It's fresh. It's the two F's are fresh and floral. That's what we're getting from this. Definitely fresh, definitely floral. A slight grassy edge. It doesn't have the sort of ripe. I'm not getting ripeness. I'm getting something much more sort of, I can't really describe it, green. Just something much more green, something much more spring kind of quality. The leaves are looking pretty much on the way to being unfurled. They're not very big leaves. Oh, you get a fair bit of light. I might try setting up in here in the future. You get a better view of the leaves. They're pretty much unfurled. So let's push that for 27, maybe as far as 30, but no more than 20, no more than 30. I hope you all had a blessed and restful Christmas. I found, I don't know if it's because, other than the unusual services for this time of year, there wasn't much happening in the last few days before Christmas, so Christmas didn't feel like it was sneaking up on me. I was listening to a YouTuber who was saying just the opposite. They'd been so busy it had just happened. But I always say that's the point of Advent. Wonderful. Advent, of course, being the time of preparation to get us ready for Christmas. Slightly vegetal. The orchid quality seems to have calmed down a bit. More of the freshness there. The other's about as intense as it was that second steeping. There is something of the floral, but I'd have been hard-pressed to say that it was an orchid this time. That's the kettle resetting itself. Something much sweeter off the cup. More balanced. The fresh and the floral are going well together. You don't have the orchid front and centre. So definitely those two Fs, fresh and floral, very strongly orchid. By the time of that third steeping, not quite as potent, better balanced, and definitely didn't take long to really get a flavourful cup. You're looking at 25 seconds on the second steeping. So let's pause here and we'll come back to review the autumn version of Mao Xie or hairy crab. See you in a moment. Hello and welcome to the second part of part 3, part 3b, if you will, where we are reviewing the autumn 2025 harvest version of the Mao Xie or hairy crab Oolong. The leaves smell rather different on the dry note than the spring version. The spring version, it was a very intense, grassy, almost minty kind of scent. This one is something much more sort of ripe and fruity. So it's already, if the taste matches that at all, this is going to be very different to the autumn version of the Banshan, which was much more kind of, that was the sharper one. This one smells, on the dry note, like it's going to be a more lush version. Same as the spring, 3 grams, 50 mils of water per steeping, 85 degrees. We're going to go 20, 25, 30, just for the sake of uniformity. So here we go with our 25, our 20, the kettle rumbling away. There we go. That's 20 seconds. Let's move this over here so I don't run the risk of spilling on myself. That's interesting. These leaves are already unfurling quicker than the spring. There, I'm not picking up a particular kind of flower. It's incredibly sweet. Be interested to see if it does have a fruity note. That's a very, very pale yellow. That's almost white tea coloured, but you're seeing what I am seeing. Oh yeah, there's a hint of orchid or some very distinct flower, but it's much riper, and I'd say what you're getting more is a sort of generic ripe fruit quality. with a much, the fruity is much stronger off the cup. Slightly sharper on the taste, more than I thought I was expecting. The fruit is definitely there. The floral is there in the background, kind of holding it all together. But there's much more fruit. It's staying on the palate longer than the 20 seconds of the spring version. But there's nothing distinctive. I couldn't have said, it reminds me of this kind of fruit. And if I hadn't tried the spring, I'm not sure I would have been able to say it's the orchid quality. Let's give this our 25. I should have used my counter, but we're going to have to wing it. "25 seconds. Very fresh. More fruit. Very little floral now. There's something in the background, once again, kind of holding it together. The leaves are about as unfurled as they were. Oh, that's a great view. As they were for the spring. Colour-wise, slightly more intense yellow. We're following the same path as the spring in that respect. But once again, the floral is very definitely in the background. There's a nondescript, that's not fair. An unidentifiable fruit in the foreground. A bit of that freshness, the greenery, the vegetal that I associate with the green oolong. But like I say, a perfumey kind of fruity note. One that I can't really identify. It's much cleaner off the cup. Oh, that's nice though. The 3 Fs are working together very well there. The flavour is dropping off slightly. I can't help feeling if the second steeping had been 2 or 3 seconds longer. But as I say, we're trying to be consistent here. But oh, that's really nicely balanced. So the last one at 30. If it looks like being overdone, we'll pull it back, but should be 30. The cat's rolled onto his back over here. It's a hard life being a cat. All I can see is a chin and a big smile. It does occasionally catch mice and make himself useful, but I don't think he was ever intended to be an outdoor. I was trying to get even more comfortable. I don't think he was ever intended to be an outdoor cat. Okay. Okay. The floral note has come in more strongly in this one, but so has the intense sweetness and the fruitiness A bit like the second cup, but I'm getting that on the nose now. Colour-wise, about the same as the last one, maybe slightly more yellow. Oh wow, that's heady, as they would say. Yeah, all three of them working very well together, the fresh, the floral, and the fruity. But I'd be hard-pressed to identify any of them. Let's see what this is like on the cup. All of them very intense, very sweet. A more heady version of the second cup. Everything's just much more intense. That's got a lot to give. Handled carefully, you could maybe get, well, 95, you can't really get the temperature much higher. I would say there's at least a couple more steepings in that. So, let's stop that rumbling at me. What can we say? The first one, the spring Mao Xie, had a very definitive orchid fragrance, and I would pin that down to that kind of flower. The freshness was very prevalent, the floral quality and an identifiable floral. Kind of springtime, I don't know why, but fresh grassiness, greenness, springness, if there's such a word, is what popped into my head. This is much more the summery fruitiness, something much more lush and ripe, heavy on the fruit and the floral, with some freshness as well. It's a green oolong. I wouldn't have been able to say what kind of flower in that one because it's toned down slightly, and I couldn't have told you what fruit, but there's a lot of it. It's still sitting here on my palate. Depending on what you like, do you want something that's full of spring greenness, or do you want something that's a little more lush? Do you want something where you can say it's this flavour, this flower, or do you want something more perfumey, more sort of generic, all-purpose? If generic is sounds like a criticism, it really isn't. They're both fantastic. It's not often I end up not liking a tea. I'm pleased to say both of these are just fantastic. I really enjoy that orchid fragrance from the spring Mao Xie, but I love the fruit that comes in on the autumn version. So this isn't a review in the standard sense of one or the other. I'm trying to compare and contrast, and I would love to know, go back to this recording this time next year if we're spared, and see what spring 26 is like against autumn 26. Incidentally, I should point out that what I do with my teas, I try to have sealed samples if the tea is going to be kept for a year or more or less a year. So I'm going to keep a portion of the autumn. I've bought some of the autumn Mao Xie and the Benchan and a few others, and I'm going to keep those till autumn next year to do a year about comparison. But also I'm going to keep some of the spring 2025 so that I can do a year about for springtime 2026, and then keep some of that 2026 spring and do a 2 seasons with the winter and autumn 2026. Gets complicated. Thankfully, I have a lot of Excel spreadsheets. So both wonderful, depending on what kind of flavor profile you want. Very accessible. Absolute no difficulty whatsoever. But always be careful to try and get particular harvest because they are very different. So, hearty recommendation from me on all three fronts. Maybe the second, maybe the autumn one you could do with slightly longer steeps, but you'll get more steepings, that's for certain. So, that's me wittering on for long enough. Happy steeping, and God bless.